Airports have always made me uneasy at night. In the daytime, they feel busy and normal. There are lines, voices, rolling suitcases, people drinking bad coffee, kids crying, gate agents talking over the speakers. Even when something feels stressful, it still feels safe because there are always people everywhere. But airports after midnight are different. The bright lights stay on, the signs still glow, the moving walkways keep humming, and every few minutes some automated voice still says something about unattended baggage. But once most of the flights are gone, all that empty space starts to feel wrong. It feels like a place that was built for thousands of people, but suddenly forgot what to do when only a handful are left. This happened to me in October of 2022, at an airport outside Denver. I had flown out for a work training that lasted 3 days. Nothing strange happened on the trip itself. The meeting was boring, the hotel was decent, and by the last day all I wanted was to get home. My return flight was supposed to leave around 9:40 p.m. and land a little after midnight. At about 8:15, while I was sitting at the gate, I got a text saying my flight had been delayed. Then delayed again. Then cancelled. Apparently there had been some issue with the crew timing out, and the airline had no replacement available that night. The next flight they could get me on was early the next morning, around 6:10 a.m. I remember just staring at my phone, exhausted. I hadn't slept well the whole trip, and I felt that deep kind of tired where you stop even being angry and just feel empty. The airline gave me a hotel voucher and a meal voucher. The woman at the desk circled a number on the paper and told me there was a hotel shuttle that ran every 30 minutes from the ground transportation area. I asked if I had enough time to go get my checked bag. She nodded and said, "Yes, but you should do it now. Baggage claim gets really quiet after 11. I got my suitcase, followed the signs for ground transportation, and by the time I got outside, it was cold enough that I could see my breath. There were only a few people left out there. A couple arguing quietly by the curb. A pilot dragging a suitcase. Some guy smoking near a concrete pillar even though I'm pretty sure that wasn't allowed. Every few minutes, a shuttle would pull up, take a few people, and leave. I checked the hotel voucher again. The hotel name was one I didn't recognize, but the desk agent had said it was only about 10 minutes away. I found the sign for hotel shuttles and waited under it with my suitcase. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. My phone battery was under 15% because I'd been using it all day, and I didn't have my charger in an easy-to-reach part of my bag. The cold wasn't helping. I finally called the hotel using the number on the voucher. A tired-sounding woman answered and told me the shuttle was running late because they'd had a driver call out sick. She said one was still coming, and that I should wait at Zone C, Island 4. I was standing in Zone B. So I hauled my suitcase farther down the sidewalk until I saw Zone C. At that point there were even fewer people outside. The arguing couple was gone. The smoker was gone. It felt like I had somehow missed the last wave of normal human activity. At Island 4, there was one other person waiting. He was maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, wearing a dark coat and one of those neck pillows people use on planes. He had a small roller bag and was standing very still, facing the road. When I stopped near the sign, he turned and gave me a small nod. "Waiting on the shuttle?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "For the Westway Suites." He looked at me for a second too long, then nodded again. "Me too." Something about him made me uneasy immediately, but I told myself that was just because it was late and I was tired. He wasn't doing anything weird. He just had that drained, blank look people get in airports. A few minutes later, headlights turned into the lane and an unmarked white shuttle van pulled up. There was no hotel logo on it. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was that the driver didn't lower the window right away. He just sat there for a second, engine idling, then opened the door. The older man beside me grabbed his bag. The driver leaned out and said, "Westway?" I said, "Yeah." The older man said, "That's us." I still remember the feeling I got in my stomach then. It was small, but sharp. Just enough to make me hesitate. I asked the driver, "This is for Westway Suites?" He gave this annoyed little shrug and said, "Yeah, hop in. Running behind tonight." His voice sounded normal enough, but I still looked for some kind of logo or placard inside the windshield, and didn't see one. The older man was already climbing in through the side door. I wish I could say that I trusted my instincts and stepped back. I didn't. I got in. Inside, the van smelled like old coffee and damp carpet. There were 4 rows of seats. I sat near the middle on the left side. The older man sat all the way in the back. The driver shut the door and pulled away from the curb. At first, everything seemed fine. We exited the airport loop, passed a gas station, and took the road that looked like it led toward the hotels. I leaned my head back for a second and closed my eyes. Then I heard the older man say, very calmly, "This isn't the right way." My eyes opened immediately. The driver didn't answer. I looked out the window. We were no longer on the road where all the airport hotels were lined up. The buildings around us were lower and farther apart. Dark lots. Chain-link fences. Warehouse-looking structures. I said, "Hey, aren't the hotels back there?" The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "There's construction. Shortcut." His tone made it sound like I was stupid for asking. The older man in the back said, "No, there isn't." Nobody spoke after that. I could hear the tires on the road, the rattling of the van, and this faint clicking sound from somewhere near the driver's seat. Maybe a turn signal that wasn't fully resetting. Maybe something else. I looked down at my phone. 10% battery. No signal. That didn't make sense to me. We were still close to the airport. I should have had signal. I raised the phone a little, like that would help. Nothing. Then I noticed the older man was staring at me. Not in a threatening way. More like he wanted me to understand something without saying it. I mouthed, "What?" He slowly shook his head. My heart started beating harder. The driver took another turn. Now we were on a narrower road with no street lights. There were industrial lots on either side, and beyond them only darkness. I said a little louder, "I need you to stop." The driver didn't respond. I said, "Stop the van?" He finally said, "Relax. We're almost there." The older man in the back suddenly spoke up. "You need to let us out. Now." The driver hit the brakes so hard the whole van jerked. We were in front of a locked gate. I remember the headlights washing over the metal bars and the sign hanging on them, though I couldn't read what it said from where I sat. The driver turned in his seat and looked at us. He had a different face now. Not physically different. Just the expression. He no longer looked annoyed or tired. He looked cold. Focused. Like he'd stopped pretending to be a driver and was now figuring out what to do next. Then he said, "Which one of you made the call?" Neither of us answered. He looked at the older man. Then at me. "Which one?" the older man said. What call? The driver smiled, but only with his mouth. That one wasn't for you. The van sat there idling. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the driver reached toward the area beside his seat, below the dash, and I heard a metallic sound. I don't know if he was grabbing a tool, a tire iron, a knife, or something else. I never saw it clearly, because the second I heard that sound, the older man in the back shouted, "Open it!" I lunged for the side door. For one terrible second it wouldn't budge, and I thought it was locked. Then it slid open. The older man was right behind me. We jumped out and hit the pavement hard. My suitcase fell out after me. I left it there and ran. I heard the driver yell something, then the van door slammed. The older man shouted, "This way!" There was a gap in the chain-link fence to the left, half hidden by weeds and broken pallets. We squeezed through it, and ran across a dirt lot behind some storage buildings. I could hear the van engine revving nearby. At one point headlights swept across the lot and passed maybe 30 feet from us. We both dropped behind a rusted dumpster and stayed completely still. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged. The older man was whispering, "Don't move! Don't move!" The engine sound faded, then got louder again, circling. My knees were shaking so badly that I had to hold the side of the dumpster to keep from falling. After what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably less than 2, the older man pointed toward a low building behind us. There was a light on above a metal door. We ran to it. He pounded on the door so hard I thought his fist would break. No answer. He pounded again and yelled, "Open up! Please!" The door cracked open and a guy in a reflective vest looked out, furious at first, until he saw our faces. "What the hell?" "There's a man in a van," the older man said. "Call the police." The worker let us in immediately and locked the door behind us. The inside of the building was some kind of maintenance office or warehouse break room. There was a vending machine, a coffee maker, lockers, and a TV mounted in one corner with the sound off. The worker called 911 while I stood there bent over, trying not to throw up. He kept asking us for details. Van color. License plate. What the driver looked like. Which direction we came from. I didn't have much. I hadn't looked at the plate. I barely remembered the driver's face. It all felt unreal, like I'd just woken up inside somebody else's nightmare. Police showed up within 10 minutes. They took our statements separately. That's when I learned something that made the whole thing worse. The older man had never called the hotel. He had missed the actual hotel shuttle, asked the janitor where to wait, and then just happened to be standing there when that van arrived. Meaning the driver had likely come there for me. Because I was the one who had called the hotel from the curb. At first I thought maybe the hotel had sent some third-party driver, and there had just been confusion. But the actual hotel shuttle driver arrived while police were still interviewing us. And he was in a clearly marked van with the hotel logo all over it. He said he had been delayed because of traffic and staffing issues, but he had never sent an unmarked vehicle and had no idea who we'd gotten into. Police searched the area around the gate and nearby lots, but they never found the van. They took me to the hotel later that night. Or technically that morning. I barely slept. Every time headlights passed my window, I sat up. The next day I flew home and tried to tell myself it was over. A few days later, I got a call from a detective. He asked me to confirm something from my statement. I had mentioned that when the driver stopped at the gate, he asked, "Which one of you made the call?" The detective asked if I was sure that was the exact wording. I said yes. Then he was quiet for a second and said, "We found a record of your call to the hotel. It only lasted 42 seconds. The hotel employee says she did not ask your name." I said, "Okay." He said, "The number you called was correct. But a second call came into the hotel less than a minute later from a blocked number. The person on that call asked where the delayed airport pickup passenger was waiting." I went cold. I asked who it was. He said they didn't know. That was the last real update I ever got. The detective told me they couldn't prove a connection, but they advised me to be cautious about transportation pickups and to always verify the vehicle. I still think about that driver sometimes. But what bothers me most isn't what happened in the van. It's what happened before it. Someone knew I was stranded. Someone knew which hotel I was headed to. Someone knew where to find me. And whenever I think back to the airline desk agent circling that hotel number on my voucher, I always remember one strange thing I didn't think mattered at the time. As she handed it to me, she glanced past me at the empty line behind me and said, very softly, almost like she was answering somebody else, "He's the last one." I didn't think anything of it then. Now I do. Because when I turned around after she said it, there was nobody there. I used to work overnight cleaning planes at a regional airport in Pennsylvania. It wasn't glamorous. It was mostly vacuuming crumbs, collecting trash, wiping tray tables, and trying not to think too hard about what people do in airplane bathrooms. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to keep me afloat when I was 23 and had no real plan. Most of my shifts started around 10 p.m. and ended around 5 or 6 in the morning, depending on delays. The airport itself was pretty small compared to major ones, but at night it still had that same strange feeling all airports get when they empty out. The polished floors reflected everything. The lights made every hallway look too long. And every sound carried. There were only a handful of us on the overnight crew. Me, this older guy named Ron, a woman named Alicia, and a supervisor named Darren who mostly sat in a little office and watched cameras unless something went wrong. One night in late January, we had 3 delayed arrivals and 1 aircraft staying overnight at the gate for maintenance. Because of that, the airport was still active way later than usual. Around 1:30 a.m., I had just finished cleaning one of the smaller jets parked at Gate 11 when Ron came up beside me and said, "You doing okay?" I said, "Yeah." "Why?" He looked past me toward the empty seating area and said, "Nothing. Thought I saw a passenger sitting there." I turned around and saw nothing. "Airport's supposed to be clear by now," he said. "If you see anyone lingering around the gates, call it in." I just nodded. At the time, I thought he was being paranoid. About 20 minutes later, I was crossing the terminal toward Gate 14 with a trash bag in one hand and cleaning supplies in the other. Most of the overhead lights in that section had been dimmed to night mode. Not off, just lower. Enough to make the terminal feel half asleep. That's when I saw her. A woman sitting alone near the window at Gate 14. She looked like she was in her 40s maybe, wearing a dark red coat and black boots. She had one small carry-on bag by her feet and was sitting very straight, hands folded in her lap, looking out at the runway. At first I just assumed she was with a delayed flight. Then I remembered there were no departing flights left. I slowed down and checked the gate monitor. Blank. No destination. No boarding time. Nothing. I looked back at the woman. She hadn't moved. I said, "Ma'am?" No response. I walked a little closer. "Excuse me, ma'am? Are you waiting for someone?" Still nothing. I could hear the soft buzz of the lights above me and the distant hum of some floor machine down another corridor. Other than that, it was dead quiet. I got maybe 10 feet away and stopped. Something felt off immediately. Not because she looked scary. She didn't. She looked completely normal. That was the problem. Most stranded passengers looked tired, irritated, restless, glued to their phones. This woman looked posed. Too still. Too calm. Like someone told her exactly how to sit. I said louder this time, "Ma'am?" She turned her head very slowly and looked at me. I don't know how to explain it right, except that her face looked wrong in a way I couldn't process at first. Not deformed. Not bloody. Nothing dramatic like that. Just empty. Her expression didn't match the moment. Her eyes didn't quite focus on me. Her skin looked pale in that washed-out airport lighting. And her mouth was slightly open, like she had been about to say something for a very long time. Then she said quietly, "Is it boarding now?" I stood there for a second. "Sorry? Is it boarding now?" she repeated. Her voice sounded dry, like she hadn't spoken in hours. I looked at the gate sign again. "Which flight are you waiting for?" She stared at me. Then she looked up at the blank monitor and said, "They changed the gate." My skin prickled. I asked, "What flight number?" No answer. I took a step back and said, "Just stay here, okay? I'm gonna get someone to help." As I turned away, she said, "Don't leave me here." I looked back. Her eyes were on me now. Fully on me. There was fear in them. Real fear. And for a second I actually felt bad for her, like maybe she was confused or having some kind of medical issue. I pulled out my radio and called Darren. He answered with static first, then, "Go ahead. There's a woman at gate 14, I said. "I think she might be lost or something. Can you come down here?" There was a pause. Then he said, "Gate 14? Yeah." Another pause. Then, "Stay where you are." I remember thinking his voice had changed. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the woman, but I also stayed back. She hadn't moved again. Just sat there with her hands folded and her bag by her feet. Darren arrived with Alicia about 2 minutes later. I pointed and said, "There." Neither of them said anything. Then Darren looked at me and said, "What exactly did she say to you?" I thought that was a weird question, but I told him. She asked if it was boarding. She said they changed the gate. She asked me not to leave her there. Alicia went pale. Darren told me to stay where I was and walk toward the seating area. The woman was gone. Her seat was empty. The carry-on was gone too. I said, "What the hell?" He turned around and asked, "Where did she go?" "I don't know. I didn't take my eyes off." Then I stopped. Because that wasn't true. I had looked down at my radio for maybe 1 second while Darren was answering me. 1 second. Alicia whispered, "No." Darren got on his own radio and asked security to pull cameras for gate 14 immediately. Then he looked at me and said, "Tell me exactly what she looked like." I described her as best as I could. Red coat. Dark hair. Black boots. Small carry-on. Pale face. Alicia was shaking her head before I even finished. That's when I found out why. 2 years earlier, According to them, a woman matching that description had suffered some kind of medical emergency while waiting for a delayed flight at Gate 14. She was traveling alone. By the time paramedics arrived, she was dead. At first I thought they were messing with me. I actually laughed once, just out of nerves. But neither of them smiled. Darren said, "We don't talk about it with new hires because it freaks people out. But yeah, there've been reports." "Reports of what?" I asked. Alicia said, "People seeing her." I remember saying, "That's not funny." Darren snapped back, "Do I look like I'm joking?" A few minutes later we were in the supervisor office watching security footage. The camera angle showed part of Gate 14, including the row of seats where I had seen the woman. The timestamp was correct. You could see me entering frame from the left with the trash bag and supplies. But there was no woman. The seat was empty the whole time. I watched myself stop, speak to empty air, and then back away. I felt sick. I kept saying, "No, that's not what happened. She was right there." Darren rewound it. Same thing. Then he switched to another camera down the hall that showed me from a different angle. Again, I was clearly facing the seating area and talking to someone who wasn't there. Except there was one detail that made everything worse. On the polished floor in front of the empty seat, there was a faint dark reflection. Not clear enough to be a full person, but dark enough that something was blocking the light. Alicia saw it too and muttered, "Oh my God!" Darren paused the video. The seat looked empty. The floor reflection did not. We all stared at it for several seconds. Then Darren shut the monitor off and said, "We're done here." He sent me to help Ron on the far side of the terminal. I didn't argue. For the rest of the shift, I stayed in bright areas and kept a radio clipped so tight to my shirt it left a mark. Around 4 a.m., Ron finally asked me what happened. Apparently word had spread fast. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, then said, "Did she ask you if it was boarding now?" I stopped walking. "How did you know that?" He kept pushing his cleaning cart. "Because that's what she always asks." That hit me harder than anything Darren or Alicia had said. Not because it confirmed the story, but because of how casually he said it. Like he was talking about a stain on the carpet. I asked him if he'd seen her. He nodded once. "Only once?" "From a distance. Didn't stick around." I asked why nobody had reported it beyond airport staff. He gave a dry laugh and said, "Reported it to who? Management? They don't want ghost stories connected to an airport. Bad for business." That made enough sense that I stopped asking. About a week passed and nothing else happened. I started convincing myself there had to be some rational explanation. Exhaustion. Weird lighting. My brain filling in details where there were none. Maybe I saw a real person leave frame somehow and the camera angle didn't catch it right. Then the second thing happened. I was cleaning another late arrival, one parked overnight at Gate 14. I didn't want that gate assignment, but Darren said I was overreacting and that the plane had to be turned around by morning. It was around 2:10 a.m. when I boarded the aircraft alone with my supply cart. The cabin lights were dimmed. The plane smelled like stale air, fabric cleaner, and old coffee. I started in the back as usual, working forward. About halfway through, I realized I could hear something. A soft metallic tapping sound. At first I thought it was coming from outside the plane. Maybe maintenance equipment. But it kept happening in a pattern. Tap. Tap tap. Pause. Tap. I stopped and listened. It was coming from the front of the cabin. I slowly walked forward and leaned into the aisle. Nobody. Then I heard it again, closer now. Tap. From the overhead bin above row 3. I stared at it. The bin was closed. I waited. Nothing. I told myself there had to be a bag shifting inside or some mechanical issue. I stepped closer and reached up to open it. Before I touched the latch, a voice right behind me said, "Is it boarding now?" I spun around so fast I slammed my shoulder into the seats. Nobody was there. But I know what I heard. I ran off that plane without my cart, without my radio, without anything. I didn't stop until I reached the terminal desk where Alicia was working. I was breathing so hard I couldn't talk at first. She took one look at me and said, "You heard her." It wasn't even a question. That night Darren finally admitted there was one more detail about the woman that he hadn't told me. After she died at gate 14, her body had remained there longer than it should have because airport medical staff initially thought she had fainted. By the time they realized she was gone, the delayed flight she was meant to board had already begun boarding at another gate after a last-minute change. Multiple passengers later said they heard announcements, but the woman never got up. Some thought she was sleeping. Only one passenger claimed to have spoken to her before paramedics arrived. According to that passenger, the woman kept asking the same question over and over. "Is it boarding now?" A few months after my experience, I quit that job. I told people it was because of the hours, which was partly true. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was what happened on my last shift. I wasn't even near gate 14 that time. I was in the employee hallway behind security, turning in my badge and supplies. It was my final night. I remember feeling relieved. As I passed the small bank of monitors that showed different camera feeds around the airport, one of them caught my eye. Gate 14. The seats were empty. Then a woman in a red coat walked into frame and sat down. My whole body froze. I looked around for Darren, but the office was empty. I looked back at the monitor. The woman was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, facing the runway. Then, very slowly, she turned her head and looked directly at the camera. Not toward it. At it. And even through that grainy black and white monitor, I could tell she was smiling. I stumbled into the office and called for someone. By the time Alicia came in and looked at the screen, the seat was empty again. She asked me what was wrong. I pointed at the monitor. She looked confused and said, "It's just gate 14. Then she frowned, leaned closer to the screen, and said, "Wait." I asked what? She pointed to the lower corner of the monitor where the timestamp was displayed. It wasn't live. The footage on that screen was archived video from 2 years earlier, pulled from storage for an unrelated maintenance issue. And according to the date, the woman sitting there on the monitor wasn't appearing after her death. It was the night she died. Which means the smile I saw wasn't from a ghost showing up later. It was on the original footage. Somewhere in the archive of that airport, there is video of a woman sitting alone at gate 14 shortly before she died, turning to the camera, and smiling like she already knew she wasn't leaving. And ever since I learned that, I haven't been able to stop wondering about something. If she was just a confused passenger, why did she keep asking if it was boarding now after she was already dead? And if that really was her on the original footage, who was she smiling at? A few years ago, my younger brother Evan missed his flight because he left his wallet in a gas station bathroom an hour from the airport. That part of the story isn't scary. It's just stupid. He had driven me to the airport because I was flying to visit our aunt in Florida for a long weekend. Halfway there, he realized his wallet was gone. We argued about whether we had time to go back. He insisted we did. We didn't. By the time we got back to the airport, check-in had closed. I was angry, he felt terrible, and the only flight with an open seat was the next morning. Since he had already taken time off work to drive me, he decided to stay with me overnight until I could leave. We figured we'd just find a cheap airport hotel and laugh about it later. But that didn't happen either. There was some big event in town that weekend, and every nearby hotel was full. Not just expensive. Full. We checked online, called a few places, even asked at the information desk. Nothing. A woman at the desk told us the airport stayed open all night, and that some stranded passengers just waited in the public areas until morning. So that's what we did. This was at an airport in Georgia, not one of the giant ones but still big enough that there were multiple terminals and long stretches that got quiet after midnight. At first it almost felt fun, in a weird way. We bought snacks from a vending machine. We found a row of cushioned seats near a closed cafe. We joked around, watched videos on our phones, and made fun of the dramatic airport announcements. By around 12:30 a.m., though, the place had changed. Cleaning crews had come and gone. Most of the passengers still hanging around had fallen asleep or disappeared into other parts of the terminal. Shops were shuttered. The lights seemed brighter because there were fewer people under them. Even the sounds felt farther away. Evan stretched out across two seats and said, "Wake me up if I die." I laughed and said, "You're paying for breakfast." He pulled his hoodie over his face and was out in like 5 minutes. I stayed awake. I've never slept well in public places, and airports are probably the worst. There's always that slight feeling that somebody's watching your bag, or watching you, or that you're about to miss something important. At around 1:15, I got up to use the bathroom and stretch my legs. I told Evan where I was going. He gave a tired thumbs up without moving the hoodie from his face. The nearest bathroom was down a quieter side corridor near a set of locked employee doors. The hallway was cleaner than the main seating area, with polished tile floors and framed travel posters on the walls. It looked almost too perfect, which made it feel colder somehow. On my way back from the bathroom, I noticed one of the employee doors was slightly open. Just a crack. Behind it was a dimly lit service corridor. I probably would have ignored it if not for the voice I heard coming from inside. A woman's voice, low and strained, saying, "Hello?" I stopped immediately. Then I heard it again. "Can somebody help me?" My first thought was that someone had gotten locked in a back room or hurt themselves. I pushed the door open wider and looked in. The corridor was narrow, concrete-walled, and lit by those long fluorescent lights that make everything look sickly. There were pipes along the ceiling and a line of utility carts pushed against one wall. About 40 feet down, the hall turned to the right. I called out, "Hello?" The woman answered right away. "Yes, please, I'm back here." Her voice sounded shaky, scared. I stepped in a few feet. "Are you okay?" "No," she said. "Please hurry." I looked back over my shoulder toward the terminal. Evan was out of sight from there. I could still go get security, I thought. That would be smarter. But then the woman said, "He's coming back." That made me move. I know that was stupid. I know that now. I started down the corridor faster, heart already picking up. What happened? I asked. Are you hurt? No response. I reached the corner and turned right. The hallway beyond was longer and even dimmer. There were several doors on either side labeled things like electrical, storage, staff only. At the far end was another door with a red exit sign above it. No woman. No one at all. I stopped walking. Hello? Silence. Then, from somewhere behind me, I heard the first door swing shut. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. I ran back the way I came. The door to the terminal was closed. I grabbed the handle. Locked. My stomach dropped. I yanked it harder, then pounded on it. Hey! Nothing. I looked through the narrow wired glass window and could see part of the empty hallway outside, but no people. I banged again. Hello? Open the door! Still nothing. I pulled out my phone. No signal. At first I thought that was because of the concrete walls, but even when I held the phone high and walked farther down the hall, it kept flickering between one bar and none. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from deeper in the service corridor. I turned and stared down the hall. Nothing moved. Then the footsteps stopped. I can still remember how loud the fluorescent lights sounded in that moment. That dry electrical hum. The faint buzz. My own breathing. I said, "Who's there?" No answer. I backed away until my shoulders hit the locked door behind me. Then one of the storage room doors near the middle of the hall clicked open by itself. Just an inch. Darkness inside. I watched it for maybe 5 seconds frozen. Then it opened a little wider. I don't know why I did what I did next, but I think part of me was still trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe an employee. Maybe the woman. Maybe someone who could let me out. I approached the room slowly. The metal sign on the door said janitorial. I could smell bleach and wet mop strings before I reached it. I pushed the door open. Inside was a cramped supply room with shelves, cleaning products, paper goods, and a utility sink. No person. No open vent. No other door. I actually laughed once then, but it came out shaky and wrong. I backed out of the room and pulled the door shut. The second it latched, I heard the woman's voice again. Very close. Right behind me. "Don't let him see you." I spun around and slammed into the opposite wall. There was nobody there. I started shouting then. Not words at first. Just panic. I ran to the far end of the corridor and pushed through the exit door under the red sign. Alarm bells exploded overhead. I was outside on a fenced service ramp behind the terminal. Cold air hit me in the face. There were baggage carts parked out there, a fuel truck in the distance, and a wide stretch of concrete lit by floodlights. No people. The exit door had automatically locked behind me. I was trapped outside now. I started moving along the fence, looking for any gate or anyone at all, while the alarm kept blaring behind me. That was when I saw a man standing about 50 yards away between two baggage carts. He was facing me. He wore dark airport work clothes, maybe maintenance or ground crew, but from that distance I couldn't make out details. He was just standing there under the floodlight, not moving. I shouted, "Help!" No reaction. I shouted again, waving both arms. Still nothing. Then he started walking toward me. Not running. Just walking. Slowly. I don't know why, but the second he moved, every instinct in my body told me not to wait for him to get closer. I turned and ran along the side of the building. There was another service door about 30 feet away. I hit the push bar and stumbled inside into a different hallway, also concrete, also fluorescent lit, but wider. The alarm was still going off somewhere behind me. This corridor led to a freight elevator and a loading area stacked with boxes. I could hear voices now, distant but real. I screamed for help until a baggage handler and a TSA officer came through a connecting door and found me crying and half hyperventilating beside the elevator. They brought me back into the main terminal through a security access point. Evan was awake by then and looked terrified. He said I had been gone almost 30 minutes. To me it had felt like maybe 10. Airport police took my statement. I told them everything, including the woman's voice and the man outside. They looked skeptical until I mentioned the alarmed exit door. One officer said, "That door shouldn't have been accessible from the public side." Another asked me exactly where I entered the service corridor. I showed them. The door was now fully closed and required a badge to open. There was no sign it had ever been left cracked. When they reviewed nearby cameras, they found footage of me entering the hallway alone. No woman was visible or audible, obviously. But there was one part that bothered the officers enough that they stopped treating the whole thing like a harmless mistake. About 2 minutes after I entered the service corridor, a man in dark work clothes walked up from the opposite direction in the public hallway and stopped outside the door. He didn't have a badge visible. He didn't try to open it. He just stood there. For almost a full minute. Then he looked directly into the camera and walked away. The officer asked if I recognized him. I said no. They zoomed in as much as they could, but the image was grainy. White male, maybe 40s or 50s, average build, airport jacket, baseball cap. That was about it. Then they checked the exterior ramp cameras. At 1:27 a.m., one of the cameras caught a man walking between baggage carts toward the side of the terminal where I had exited. Same build. Same cap. Same dark uniform. But he disappeared into a blind spot before reaching me. Airport police asked operations to identify him among overnight staff. Nobody could. That should have been the end of it. Creepy, but explainable in some way. Maybe some random unauthorized worker. Maybe a trespasser. Maybe somebody trying to scare people. What made it worse was what happened while we were leaving. They escorted Evan and me to a public waiting area near the front entrance until morning. Either of us slept. At around 4:45 a.m., the first wave of early travelers started arriving and the airport felt normal again. I almost convinced myself the worst part had just been being trapped alone. Then an older airport employee, a woman pushing a coffee cart, stopped when she overheard part of my conversation with Evan. She asked, "Did you say service corridor?" I said yes. She looked at me for a long second and then asked, "Did you hear a woman?" I didn't answer right away. She gave this tired little nod, like she already knew. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Was she asking for help or trying to help you?" I asked what she meant. The woman parked her coffee cart and told us that years earlier, before part of the terminal had been renovated, an employee had been attacked in one of the old back corridors by a man who wasn't supposed to be there. The employee was a cleaner working overnight. She survived long enough to call for help, but not long enough to identify him clearly. After that, there were stories. Some people said they heard a woman crying in the service halls. Some said she called out for help. Others said she warned them to leave. A few said both. I asked if the attacker had ever been caught. The woman shook her head. Then she said, "The weird thing is, the descriptions never matched. Some people said he wore maintenance clothes. Some said ground crew. Some said a security jacket. But always an airport uniform. Like he wanted to belong there." Right then, an airport police officer walked back over to us and quietly asked me to come with him for one more question. He took me to the small office where they had the camera stills up on a screen. He pointed to the image of the man outside the service door in the public hallway. The grainy frame showed him looking into the camera. Then the officer opened another file beside it. It was older footage. Much older. Different timestamp style. Lower resolution. Same hallway before renovation. In that older image, taken years apart, there was also a man standing outside that same service corridor. Same posture. Same baseball cap. Same build. He was looking directly into the camera. I said, "That's him." The officer didn't answer. I asked where that image came from. He said it was pulled from the archived investigation into the attack on the cleaner. I actually felt my legs weaken. I said, "That's impossible." The officer nodded slowly and said, "That's what I'm trying to understand." He asked me one final question. "When the woman spoke to you, what exactly did she say the first time?" I told him. "Can somebody help me?" He looked at the old case file, then back at me. According to the original report, the attacked cleaner had managed to radio only one partial sentence before contact was lost. Not her name. Not her location. Just, "Can somebody help me?" I still flew out that morning, because by then all I wanted was to get away from that place. For months after, I had nightmares about concrete hallways and locked doors and alarm lights flashing red over empty corridors. But the worst part came almost a year later. My brother Evan called me one night and asked, "Did you ever keep that airport police card?" I said yes. He told me to sit down. Apparently he had been cleaning out his car and found my old boarding pass tucked between the seats from that night. He said when he picked it up, a folded slip of paper fell out with it. He assumed it was trash at first. Then he opened it. On the paper was a handwritten message in shaky block letters. "Don't go when she calls." I told him that wasn't funny. He swore on everything that he didn't write it. I asked where exactly he found it. He said it had been wedged inside the outer pocket of my backpack, the one I never used. I had used that same bag the entire night at the airport. Nobody should have had access to it except me and Evan. I asked him to send me a picture. He did. I recognized the paper immediately. It was a baggage claim stub envelope, the kind some airlines keep by the check-in counters. On the back, barely visible unless you zoomed in, was a faint partial fingerprint in some dark smudged residue. Evan said he almost threw it away. I told him not to. I mailed it to the detective whose card I still had from that night. He called me a week later and asked where I had gotten it. I told him the whole story again. Then he said something that made my skin crawl. The handwriting on the note wasn't a match for any employee they had on record. But the phrasing was strange. Because in the archived statements from the old attack case, one witness had reported hearing the injured cleaner say something just before paramedics arrived. Not, "Help me." Not, "He's here." She had grabbed the witness's sleeve and whispered, "Don't go when she calls." So now I don't know what to think. I don't know if the woman's voice in that corridor was a victim trying to save me. I don't know if it was something using her voice to lure me deeper inside. And I definitely don't know who the man in the airport uniform really was, or how he could appear in footage years apart without seeming to age. All I know is that when I think back on that night, there's one detail that still ruins my sleep. When I first entered that service hallway, before the door slammed shut, I'm almost sure I heard two different female voices. One calling from deep in the corridor for help, and another, much closer to my ear, whispering, "Not this way." At the time, I thought it was just an echo. Now I'm not so sure. Which story scared you the most? Comment below and subscribe for more true horror stories. If you want to share your story with us, send us at belladarktales@gmail.com.